All right, settle down, let's get this party started. All right. If anyone wishes to address the city council on any item considered at this meeting before or during the council's consideration of that item, please enter your name in the electronic kiosk located in the lobby. The city council will allocate up to a maximum of 3 minutes per speaker for each agenda item, which we only have one. Staff reports are available online at the city's website, cityofreading.gov, and in the public view binder located on the podium at the north side of the chambers. All right, let's do the pledge. One, two, three, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. No, not today. All right. Roll call.
Councilmember Audette?
Here.
Councilmember Danuka is absent. Resner?
Coming. Present.
Lata?
Here.
And Mayor Munz.
Here. All right, we'll start with public comment. Just a few names. Denise Maxwell, you're up.
We're not going to have a presentation
Oh.
first?
Yeah,
Huh?
You have to have a presentation first. Because this isn't,
because we don't have an
We don't have
agenda
an
three.
agenda.
Yeah, we don't have a three, number three on the, public comment, like regular public.
what?
So you would only be taking public comment on the item that's on the agenda. It's council's discretion as to when in the meeting you want.
Yeah, do the presentation so they know what they're commenting on.
Okay, all right, I can go with that. All right. Mr. Robinette? Sounds good to me.
So, yeah, I did.
Oh, yeah, me too. Had a migraine all day.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the
Just like a
community. We had a report of findings that was issued in August of 2025, and I was asked by the council to issue a response to that report. And I wanted to start by saying, as an accountant, I've always taken my responsibility seriously of questioning myself, questioning my work. The example I would always use is, as I'm reconciling something, it's important to continue to question yourself because sometimes you might find the right number, but there's more underlying issues that need to be addressed as part of that reconciliation. And so I take that very seriously, and I always have, and I took that same level of seriousness to my response to this report. So to begin is just a brief outline of the presentation, beginning with the financial reports and the informational overview, discussion of the current budget, discussion of some historical budget information, discussion of American Rescue Plan Act funds and how they were used, and then finally finishing with some salaries and personnel positions at the very end. So first is an overview of our timeline of the budget and financial reporting. Our budget always begins in an odd year, spring of an odd year, and we work on getting all of the information necessary, whether it be personnel costing, all the assumptions we're going to use to build into that budget. At the same time, our departments are working towards explaining, we actually moved to a zero-based budget process where they actually have to explain every single item in their budget. And the departments are working on spreadsheets to justify every line item in the new system. They were putting that justification in the actual system. And at the same time, finance begins to work to reconcile all the personnel positions as well. And so every single line item is justified in the budget, and then in the necessary funds, the 10-year plans are produced or long-term financial plans to ensure the long-term stability of the different funds. And most of this presentation will focus on the general fund financial plan. After the biennial budget, we move into doing quarterly updates. These include revenues and expenses, budget to actuals. We update the 10-year plan. And that happens, budget to actuals happen 4 times a year for a total of 8 over the course of the 2-year budget cycle. And the 10-year plan is typically updated 2 times a year or 4 times over the course of the budget cycle. Finally, we move into our annual audit process and the preparation of our annual comprehensive financial report, or ACFR. This is basically our final audited financial information. It uses different bases of accounting depending on what page you're on in the book. And it's a very complex process, and I always thank the finance team for their hard work on that process because it begins with our day-to-day work and it ends with kind of that year-end culmination of all the efforts. And ultimately, we turn all that information over to our external auditors every year, and we go through an annual audit process. In the next couple slides, I'll get into exactly some of the specifics of what they're hoping to accomplish. So this slide actually goes over in the most recent biennial budget development process, the series of budget workshops that we went through. So on January 23rd, 2025, we had a general fund and internal service fund overview. It mostly focused on the previous budget as a reference point to our current budget development. But in that process, there was some direction received from council, directed staff to review the cannabis tax rates, directed staff to review fee charging methodology across what we commonly refer to as our master fee schedule or schedule of fees. Also at that meeting, there was an acknowledgement of cutting one position who had left city employment with the communications team, communications coordinator, and then a delay of the radio loan payments. And then moving forward on March 4th, it's not on this slide here, but on March 4th, council approved rates to the cannabis tax, changes to the rates. And then on March 13th, there was a second budget workshop held where council directed staff to reduce rolling stock contributions in the general fund. 3 additional police officers were removed from the budget. The tourism contract was reduced by $350,000. And then there was specific direction received on how we would approach the fees as we develop them as part of the master fee schedule. Some of the most substantive of which included the development service and recreation fees. Ultimately, moving forward into May 6th, there was a full general fund overview and internal service fund presentation of the budget. There was some discussion, particularly around the sales tax assumptions and lowering the assumptions in the first couple of years. And so on May 21st, 2025, there was some updates to the general fund and a 10-year plan presented, and then the enterprise fund budget workshop. And then on June 17th, 2025, the budget was adopted. So next is, I just want to be clear, when we're talking about a balanced budget, what do we mean? We mean that revenues or projected revenues are equal to or greater than projected expenditures. And some of the challenges in this process is revenues can be unpredictable. We've seen that particularly over the past probably 3 or 4 years with sales tax. And then, of course, there's always potential unknown expenditure pressures that could be lurking around the corner, especially when you're adopting a biennial budget that could happen due to inflation, union agreements, or additional service demands. So the status of a balanced budget could change as the conditions move into the future. In this example, we adopted a budget back in June. Most of the work for that budget was done in March and April timeframe. And so we're already 6 months into that budget effectively, or 6 months past when that work was done. So importantly, the roles of the different elements here. Finance is responsible for gathering and presenting information to the city manager. And ultimately, once the actual information comes in, we account for that information and report financial information back to council. The city manager presents and makes recommendations to council and ultimately is responsible for budget management. Ultimately, council is responsible for deliberating, making any modifications, and requesting additional information as necessary. And then if they feel like they have all the information they need, approve the budget. So next up, I wanted to give a brief overview about our 10-year plan. I know it was mentioned earlier in the presentation, but the City of Reading, this is our long-term financial planning tool. It's adopted and reconciled to the adopted budget for the first 2 years of the biennial. After that, we amend it typically 4 times through council action at the mid-year, the mid-cycle, the second mid-year, and then the year-end in September. Ultimately, this is amended for council actions, including all budget resolutions between the amendment cycles. Ooh, I need to go back one. Sorry, I skipped over a slide. So the council policy that dictates that we have a 10-year plan is Council Policy 412, and it also mentions the 10% of expenditure required reserve. This was changed from 5% to 10% in 2020 and provides a greater level of reserve for the health of the general fund. The Council Policy 219 requires that 73% of expenditures cap on personnel expenditures. I thought this quote was powerful from Council Policy 412, which I believe to be a great council policy, is the budget decisions today will have an impact on the city's future, and not only what is accomplished, but what resources are available in the future. It is important to know what the 10-year plan is not. The 10-year plan is not amended for the actual results of revenue and expenses, and it is not amended for total amended, including carryovers and other items allowed by council policy, such as rolling stock, the equipment replacement fund, and carryovers, as I mentioned. Next, the quarterly financial updates. This is when staff presents budget to actuals for revenue and expenses. Budget to actuals based on the cash flow. The best example I use here is the actual property tax, because this is an item that is heavily influenced by cash flow. We don't receive most of the property tax, well, half the property tax until January. So built into our cash flow assumptions is receiving that property tax in January. And so we actually report relative to those expectations that staff set during the budget process. Included in this process is a presentation to council where we do our best to emphasize the important key takeaways of each of the updates to council. And then ultimately, as I mentioned, at the mid-year, mid-cycle, and year-end, 4 times through the budget process, we update the 10-year plan. So to discuss a little bit about our annual comprehensive financial report, this is a slide that kind of goes over the main substantive sections of the financial report. I always tell people, if you want to learn a lot of interesting information about our city, I would flip to the statistical section. It is important to note that that is an unaudited section. And then there's an introductory section that is helpful for the reader to understand some key information about the city, our auditors, and the organization as a whole. And then the kind of meat and potatoes, as I like to call it, is the financial section. This includes the independent auditor's report. It includes the management discussion and analysis, which is unaudited. It includes all of the financial statements, the notes to the financial statements, and any required supplementary information or supplementary information. Finally, our annual audit. This is an independent review of our financial statements. There's basically 5 required engagements, but in that, there's a large list of things they're trying to ensure that we're following. But the 5 engagements are the City ACFR, Rabbit ACFR, the Housing Basic Financial Statement, our passenger facility charges. If you don't know what that is as a result of us having passenger airlines at the Reading Airport. We receive passenger facility charges, and we are required to undergo an annual audit with an opinion from the auditors on that item. And then the single audit, some people might refer to this as your CFA, your Schedule of Federal Awards. Any agency that receives over $750,000 in federal grant money must undergo a single audit, and we undergo one every single year. And ultimately, through that process, the auditors are evaluating the financial records, they're evaluating our internal controls, and they're ensuring that we have compliance to different major programs and compliance with different laws, regulations, and then ultimately offering an opinion on the fairness of the financial reporting. And oftentimes through that process, there's some opportunities they offer for improvements and efficiencies and accountability. This is completed in accordance with GAAP, GAS, and the uniform guidance. So the financial reporting results, I am proud to say that I work in a department that has a long history of taking our financial information extremely seriously and dedicating a lot of time to this community. And so we, as a result of that hard work, we haven't had any audit findings. The last one I could find was 2012. We've received the GFOA Certificate in Excellence in Financial Reporting for 40 consecutive years. I expect the most recent year of FY 2024 to hear on that soon. It would be 41 years. And then we've received the GFOA Distinguished Budget Presentation Award since 2019. So moving to a project that is important to our financial reporting because of the impact that it's had is our Oracle project. Ultimately, we council directed staff in late 2021 to release an RFP. That RFP was released in early 2022, and a system selection was made in around May of 2022. And then from there, we negotiated a contract and agreed to a contract with the system and what they call a system implementer or system integrator. And ultimately, this is the timeline of the project. And so the financial system We began work in August of 2022, and we went live on July 1st of 2023. The HCM system, the project began in earnest in January of 2023. The original scheduled go live date was January of 2024, but ultimately it was postponed until October 13th of 2024. And then the EPM, or the budget module, was basically we started the project in January 2024 with a go live that was on time of January 1st, 2025. The important part here is that during this process, finance had no staffing augmentations or increases to staffing. Speaking with a lot of different cities and experts in this area, oftentimes a city of our size would likely need 2 positions to effectively manage this. And through the process, finance was actually down on average. I've done the kind of full chart through the entire process, and we were down 2 positions on average through the implementation and go live. Ultimately, this had a cascading impact, and not everything was delivered on the exact same timelines as we were accustomed to. But many of these timelines met or exceeded what other cities have experienced doing a similar project. Our first ACFR was delivered on March 18, 2025. That's about 2 months late for us. Talking with our auditors through the process last year, they actually said that it can sometimes delay ACFR presentations by up to or over a year. And so we worked very hard to achieve that date, but as I said, there's a cascading impact when you put the resources in to understand your new system and produce your financial statements. There's obviously things that are now taking longer throughout the process. We did complete our first budget on time, ultimately being adopted on June 17, 2025. Cash reports, we delivered a report kind of as a sample on September 16, 2025, and they will be delivered monthly starting on November 18, 2025. As we've finished all these projects, the one thing I didn't touch on the previous slide is finance was involved in every single aspect of that project. And so our resources were involved in the financial aspect, of course, but we are instrumental in the payroll calculations. And so we were tied up, we had resources, additional time being spent to helping program that system. And so there was a number of hard decisions made of where do we prioritize the work, and through conversations with the city manager at the time, there were some things that were not delivered on the schedule we would expect. And now finally, now that we're done with these project phases, we're getting back to our expectations. And so treasury reports, we've had some intermittent reports through FY24 and FY25. Again, those will be delivered monthly starting on November 18th, 2025. Quarterly reports, we first delivered our first mid-year out of the new system in February of 2024. At that time, we noted to council that the reports had been modified and that we would continue to evaluate what council needed, what council was wanting. We believe the important part is that all of the necessary information to help them make the decisions that were necessary was included in the reports and or emphasized during the presentations that were given by staff. On September 16th of this year, we brought a set of reports that were heavily modified to attempt to get back to our old level of reporting. And we're continuing to work with council on refining that, and we will do so on into the future until it meets all council collective expectations. Then finally, the payroll registers upon go live of the new system. Again, just the cascading of all the work that happens. These registers had some information on them that should not be released to the public, personally identifiable information. And we frankly just did not have the staffing bandwidth to manually manipulate those reports. We're in process with Graviton to get that information off of those reports, but even as of now, we're having to go in and manually remove that personally identifiable information for our employees, but those have been caught up and maintained current since August 19th, 2025. Moving into our current budget, I'm gonna take a drink. So a summary or an overview of some of the claims that were addressed as part of my response to the report was that the 10-year plan does not meet the 10% reserve. There's revenue misstatements and internal departments and transfers out. The sales tax assumption was incorrectly used, and the revenue forecast, there were some concerns raised around some revenue forecasting. Also, there was an assertion of expenditure misstatements, and that beginning cash is additionally misstated. And then, of course, there was also finally some concerns over how the budget was balanced. So first, the 10-year plan does begin below 10%. And through surpluses or a balanced budget in FY26 and FY27, the cash will be rebuilt above the 10%, as you can see on the slide on the right. And I think it's important to point out in the red, that's the measurement of a balanced budget. In our case, as a city, we add this additional measurement of a 10-year plan and 10% reserve across the entire 10 years. But importantly, when people speak of a balanced budget in common vernacular, they mean revenues relative to expenses. This is going to be a little nuts and bolts, but I think it's important. It was in the report, and so first on the upper left is basically tying out the general fund 10-year plan revenues to the total in the budget document, and there's detailed references on the pages. This is important because as we move to that includes the subset of internal departments that's over kind of to the right of the slide. And there's a list there with the references on what page of the budget document, each of those, and then a subtotal of those items, which then is tied to the below amount, which ties over here on the bottom left, on the next page. We'll tie that number out. And then finally, the graph on the right will be tied out by source as I work through the next couple slides. So on the right gives you kind of internal departments, transfers in, transfers out for the general fund. On the lower left is the transfers in. And so the first transfer in is for gas tax. Basically, most of our streets are funded through gas tax. And this is the transfer to basically, that will be the work performed in streets. Then we have a Prop 172 transfer. It's $272,000 per year from a special revenue fund within the city, but it is for specific police services. It's been there since 1992 or 1993, I believe. And then airports, a long time ago, we used to use property in lieu of tax with airports. Through conversations with the FAA, we believed it would be better to actually have this be a reimbursement of the services that are being performed out there. And this isn't the entire cost of the 3 ARF captains, but through each budget, there's a conversation with council about how much do we want to transfer from airports to try to balance the needs of the airport, but also the needs of the general fund. And that $250,000 has been in place for 2 budget cycles now. So that total ties to the total above where it says 10-year plan transfers in, and basically foots out the amount stated on the 10-year plan. Next up is the tie out of the internal department revenue, which is the first line on the upper left graph. The first item is the property in lieu of tax collected from the electric utility. The next line is our cost allocation plan revenue. That is reflective of city general government does services for the entire city. We have something called a cost allocation plan, which reimburses the general fund for those services. And then there's another item on there, the Public Works Admin and the MPDES. Those are costs incurred within Public Works for services that are done throughout the city and reimbursed to the general fund. And again, that total ties out to the total at the top of the chart on the left. Finally, moving on to transfers out, which is line 3 of the upper left chart. And the details are on the lower right chart, going through rolling stock, equipment replacement, parking fund, the transfer to convention center, which is effectively for the tourism contract, and then transfer to library as agreed with the contract with the county, and then the repayments of advances for the soccer turf. So some opportunities and clarifying information here. First, the 10-year plan aggregates revenues differently than the budget document. Internal departments in the 10-year plan includes the pilot, cost allocation plan, Public Works, and MPDES. The budget document includes these items, plus transfers in, transfers out, and repayments of advances. Transfers in and out in the 10-year plan are separate, with other including repayments of advances. There's some opportunities here specifically with the Public Works and NPDES to improve the reporting in the budget document so that it is more clear and easier for the public to understand. And we'll be making that change in a future budget cycle. And also we should add a schedule that discusses repayments of advances within this within the city. Discussion around the sales tax forecast. This chart shows that effectively the information that was available when we were building the budget was the completed fiscal year 2024. We would not have had fiscal year 2025 completed at the time of budget development. As I said, most of that work happens in March and April as we lead towards trying to build a budget document that can be presented to council in June. And so Subsequently, information came in that would indicate that fiscal year 25 was lower than this number, but at the time we developed the budget, we forecasted that it would be flat year over year. It actually ended up down about $500,000 year over year. But with the calculations we use, as stated to council at all the budget workshops, we use 0% from fiscal year 24 to 25, 2% increases fiscal year 26 to 27, or fiscal year 25 to 26 and 26 to 27, and then 2.5% increases thereafter. The average growth over the last 10 years, just to support the kind of historical increase of 2% or 2.5% that was used, last 10 years has been 3.4% increases. Over the last 5 years, the average increase has been 4.2%. Fiscal year 2025 was not available, as I stated, until the end of June. So revenue forecasting, I'm going to say at all, this doesn't necessarily, we spend a great deal of time on property tax, sales tax, and TOT, and all of the taxes, we do a pretty in-depth conversation with council, and actually during this biennial budget development, we even went so far to do some sensitivity analysis on each of those revenues, kind of a best case, worst case. I hate to say worst case because it probably could always be worse than you expect, and there's always a potential it's better than you expected. But doing some sensitivity analysis to give council a range of the potential outcomes on those tax revenues. On all the other revenues, we don't go into as great a detail of presenting every single revenue, but we go through a process of analyzing the historical actuals and trends, and we kind of re-baseline those projections based on the recent performance of those revenues, and then forecast forward with current economic conditions and past trends. This budget cycle, council requested that we modify some revenues as we went through the budget development process. Specifically, cannabis tax rates were increased, development fees and recreation fees, the very foundation of how we calculate those was going to be changed. And so we had to implement kind of a separate analysis this year regarding those beyond our normal process. Expenditures, the charts on page 70 and 71, it's important to point out they include the general grants fund. This is another opportunity in future budget cycles. We'll likely have a separate chart so that this is very clear which funds or which items are part of the general fund grants. And then so that it's very clear why they're not included in the 10-year plan. But in order to reconcile that, I provided a list of all the expenditures that were included in the budget that are funded by grants. And so there's a list there, $740,000 roughly in year one and just over $1 million in year two. So finally, the question of how did the budget get balanced? And ultimately, there was about $7 million of expenditure cuts that made up the bulk of it. But ultimately, both slides there, as I've mentioned multiple times, we had some major increases or major changes to the way we charge a few fees and the cannabis tax. And then on the right is a list of expenditure modifications. Starting with the tourism and marketing contract that was previously mentioned, we did kind of across the board budget reductions. Even though we asked departments to kind of build their budget from zero, it basically became necessary in this budget development cycle. And I know, having listened to history of our department, that this is a tool that sometimes has to get used. Think back to the Great Recession, where actually the city manager says, we're going to cut this amount, and then finance goes and makes those reductions across the board. And that had to happen during this budget development cycle. Rolling stock was reduced, as I mentioned before. 13 police positions were eliminated. 8 of those were sworn. 13 fire positions were eliminated. 2 assistant city clerk positions, 1 reprographics technician, and 1 marketing coordinator. So another important part that was raised is the kind of process of the 10-year plan cash. And so during the spring, as mentioned, March, April, we begin to look forward and project the cash as of July 1st. Then after that, the plan calculates the cash for the subsequent years. So that in the case of the current budget, the plan actually calculates the cash through revenue minus expenses. The change of those two will then be plus or minus to the beginning cash that you calculated, and it does the same thing for the second year. The next slide will kind of show a chart and articulate this, but once we complete the audit, we have what I've termed audited cash. You could call it financial statement cash. And then we adjust that cash for known items to get it back to the kind of the budgetary or the 10-year plan basis. And so The biggest examples of those are there's some balance sheet items. One of the things you do on your financial statement is you adjust cash to the fair market value, so you adjust for that. You adjust for rolling stock balances get put in the general fund cash on our financial statement. You reduce that out. And then you reduce it for carryovers and encumbrances, things that you already have committed to spending, and you arrive at kind of that starting point of cash based off the audited number for that same point in time. Once that's completed, we bring that to council upon the completion of the audit, and we make a recommendation to council. Some years there's no change. Some years there is a change. But ultimately, we follow that process through this cycle. Importantly to note, typically over the past, I went back about 12 years, it's always been adjusted in February with one exception. So this kind of walks through what we did this budget cycle, forecasted in March of 2025 to be approximately $9 million. The old 10-year plan would have forecasted about $8 million. With the February update, that would have been available at that time. And then, as I stated just previously, it will be adjusted to the actual amount based on the results of the financial statements after completion of the audit, and then adjusted to the 10-year plan basis of accounting. And there's, as I mentioned, the list of potential items you would adjust it for. This is just a history going all the way back to 2013, showing that that process of amending our cash in February is very normal. There's one exception that's highlighted in blue. That was actually adjusted at the year-end point in September of the prior year instead of in February. But every other time, this kind of normal pattern that I described has been followed, where we're adjusting cash in February of the subsequent year after we complete the audit. But it is based on the previous year's ending cash. So moving forward into kind of some historical budget and financial information. First here, I just wanted to say, the basis of your financial planning is the assumptions that it's built on. And one of the decisions that was made by the previous city manager was to lower these long-term assumptions. As you can see there in fiscal year 2019, the kind of standard assumption for property tax was changed to 2.5%. And property tax went through kind of a couple variations there, starting at 4% and then ultimately lowering to 3%. There's some minor changes in there, but as mentioned, this is based on more of a historical average that was used during those years. Finally, I thought it would be important, based on the document, to have kind of more of an in-depth conversation about the process of modifying sales tax. And so the first time sales tax was modified was in February, significantly modified was in February of 2022. At that time, we had almost 2 consecutive years of growth. There was a 16% growth from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 2021. And then if you go back and listen to the presentation I made, at the point that we gave this presentation, we were actually up 9% year over year through January. And we took that 9% and then said, hey, it's going to go back down to 2.5% normal growth the remainder of the year. And we reset the starting point of the number. At that time, as I said, there were 2 years of growth, almost 2 years of growth. We ended up finishing that fiscal year. The next couple slides will show that, right on target of that increase. And we didn't change any of the long-term assumptions. And so on this graph, this was a graph that was presented on February 17th, 2022. The green line was the original forecast. And then at that meeting, we were recommending increasing it to the purple line. That's for sales tax. And then the bottom area there is TOT. And same kind of process was used for TOT, just analyzing what was happening in that current fiscal year. Obviously, the ramifications of TOT, just given the size of it, are much smaller than the ramifications of sales tax. But this was kind of that first amendment to sales tax that frequently gets discussed. And the next slide actually goes into, not to say that Muni Services is a projection we always use, but it is a useful reference point. The City of Reading does not employ any economists. Muni Services does have economists. We actually are offered to attend different lectures they have on the economy and the state of the economy. But at that same time, they had the forecast that's in kind of the left column there, which was greater than the forecast that was ultimately recommended in February and that the budget was amended to. I also think it's important that there were conversations had between myself and the city manager discussing, because of 2 straight years of absolutely blowing our projections out of the water, it became obvious there was some type of amendment necessary, but to what degree? And through those conversations, I was presented to council and ultimately approved by council in February of 2022 as to what level those would be increased to. This is an update, just kind of walking through the timeline here of sales tax results and other tax results in September of 2022. And so sales tax actually beat the updated forecast that we just discussed, and TOT actually beat the updated forecast by $1 million. We did not increase these revenues because we believed we were on the right track at this point in time. I'll say that the very next meeting after that, I went back and listened to these meetings, and the very next meeting, I started it actually by saying there's a little bit of a tone shift happening. And at that point, there was a few months of data, 3 or 4 months of data that was suggesting that there was some softening in our sales tax numbers. And I would frankly offer ever since then, we've been kind of chasing these sales tax numbers downward. And so that was in November, the conversation I just mentioned, but this was the update that was done on February 16th, 2023, where we are actually doing the budget workshop for fiscal year 24 and 25. And as you can see there, the blue line on this graph is the kind of prior sales tax assumptions. And the city manager presented the red line and the new recommendation. As you can see there, it relied on a 4.5% drop in sales tax and then 2.5% growth. And at the time, he presented as some hope of some rebounds out there in the out years of 4%. Ultimately, this led to our next update in February of 2024, which is after the budget gets adopted. 6 months into that budget, it's very obvious that things were not coming in to the expectations of the model. And this graph over on the very left shows that sales tax is under projections through December by almost 600,000 and through January by 1.2 million. I do think it's important to stop and talk about, there were also some things just changing categorically about sales tax. Right about 2022, Amazon, late in 2022, early 2023, Amazon actually changed the way they were reporting sales tax. So Amazon used to report sales tax into what's called the county pool, of which the city of Reading gets anywhere from 70 to 75%. Amazon switched it to where they now report the sales tax on their warehouses through that city or that municipality. And so that ended up costing the general fund somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $600,000 per year, according to Muni Services. And so while we were seeing this kind of changing of maybe the local economic, the sales tax information, there was additionally these inputs that were outside anybody's known control. And frankly, there are things that get discussion at state legislature level regularly, and we hear regular updates from Muni Services as to the status of that. But in February, again, it was very obvious that the information was deteriorating, the financial condition was deteriorating. Thankfully, property tax was above projections, helping to mitigate some of that impact. And at this time, when I listened back to the meeting, it was very clear that there was a warning to council that future cuts were coming. Ultimately resulting in the meeting on May 21st, there was a quarterly update on May 21st, 2024, where again, I talked about the underperformance of sales tax, but another important item on that meeting was the city manager recommending $4.5 million of cuts, including 12 firefighter positions, 9 police officer positions, and a number of other items to the actual budget as we forecasting in towards the next budget. The goal was to use attrition to basically not have to do layoffs to meet some of those expenditure savings in the future. So then the update that was performed in 2024 was, this was the graph that was used on September 17, 2024. And just to orient everybody a little bit, the dotted line is the adopted budget and the dashed line is kind of the new forecast that was being recommended at this meeting. And so yet again, we were coming to council and reducing the revenue expectations. I typically like to contextualize this that, our plan uses assumed rate of increase, and as you continue to go negative or flat even, you are behind the plan. And so this was an update again to kind of reset the 10-year plan and make sure that the 10-year plan was accurately forecasting the information into the future. And this included actually all of the major revenues. And as you can see there was actually an adjustment upward of the property tax revenue. So with that history kind of covered, this is the actual sales tax that's happened from fiscal year 2015 to fiscal year 2025. This is that roughly 3.4% growth that I mentioned over those 10 years. And then this next graph actually gets into just a quick overview of how does all that information that we talked about from the time it was amended to the current budget that was adopted, what happened with the kind of forecast around sales tax. As you probably caught on to, there was other changes going on, but sales tax is the largest revenue of the general fund that is a tax revenue and can be used on anything council wishes. And so this revenue has a substantial impact to the level of service that's provided to the community. And so the blue line there is the actual that I just showed on the last graph. The green line was the amended budget in February of 2022. And then about a year later, the purple line was adopted. About a year after that, but a little over a year after that, the blue line, about a year and a half roughly after that, the blue line was approved by council. And then with the current budget is the orange line. Effectively right now, I would say based on the results of FY25, there's a pretty good chance we're already trending below that line, and it'll be something for council to continue to monitor as we go forward with quarterly updates and mid-year updates. So next, I wanted to go through a brief history of the fiscal year 24 and 25 budget. When the budget was adopted, there was a deficit in fiscal year 24 that was communicated to council of about 1.7 million, and in fiscal year 25 of 2.1 million. So that totals over the life of the 2 years about 3.9 million. In February, we decreased cash by 1.5 million. There were resolutions over the course of the 2 years that total for increasing expenditures of about 5.1 million. There were resolutions decreasing revenues based on as I mentioned a couple slides ago, the update to the forecast in September of 2022, which decreased revenues by about 1.9 million. Ultimately, at this same time frame of September, there were some modifications put into the budget to try to make sure this financial plan was accurately representing the future. And so there were MOUs that were approved by council, roughly to total of about $3.8 million annually. And this was the staff's best attempt, as approved by the city manager, to place an increase of expenditures of 2.9 million to hopefully give an accurate representation to council of what the next biennial budget would look like. And then, of course, trying to account for some of the savings that were included in that 4.5 million that were going to be achieved through budget cuts. And so those were all the changes that were made over the life of the two years to the 10-year plan. Moving forward is the American Rescue Plan Act. This is an overview. The city received almost $18.7 million in 2 equal tranches over the course of 2 years, exactly 1 year apart. During the process of appropriating this money, all federal laws and regulations were followed regarding what's sometimes referred to as SLFRF money, state and local fiscal recovery funds. All the expenditures and modifications were approved by council, and the expenditures have been audited for accuracy and compliance every year. Unknown whether it'll be tested this year. We're in that process right now with no findings reported. I know this graph is a lot of information, probably unreadable, but it just shows each of the approved items and the expenditures by year that were incurred. Next, there was some discussion around police officer funding. The actual approximate cost of with unfunded liability of a police officer is about $250,000 per year per officer. The number used in the document was $180,000 per year. I think this is a number that Barry sometimes used as shorthand to indicate the increase in a budget cycle for an officer, because the way PERS change unfunded liability, and we're going to probably talk about unfunded liability a little more throughout this presentation, but in 2016, I believe, 2017, PERS changed and kind of split off unfunded liability and made cities and counties start paying for it as a flat dollar amount, almost as a debt payment. And so at that time, we switched our 10-year plan. But the important thing was that effectively, if you were to add or change your payroll, you still had to make that unfunded liability payment. The extreme example, if you had no police officers, there's still no police officers or firefighters, there would still be an unfunded liability payment to be made. And so the net increase of cost would only increase by the cost of an officer plus what's called the normal cost, or the cost of the annual benefits earned. This is important because the unfunded liability is actually a cost associated with the entire plan, and it's not easily attributable. Actually, PERS doesn't even provide that information, that it's how much unfunded liability applies to each individual employee. So it's a cost of the plan, and it's important to note that that's a cost of people who are retired from the plan, or people who are actively working in the plan could have some amount of unfunded liability depending on their proximity to retirement. That number could be more or less. And in a couple slides, I'll get into a little more information about this. But that the actual number used when you're applying for grants or anything of that nature is $250,000 per position. Ultimately, there were 9 positions funded through the ARPA funds, and that would be about $2.2 million a year. And that breakdown there in fiscal year 2023, which was a partial year of the funding usage, only park rangers at that time, was about $640,000, and then thereafter, right in line roughly with that $2.2 million. 2.3 was incurred in FY24 as we got Beat 8 officers hired and online and fully charging towards the ARPA funds. And then again in 2025, there's about $2.2 million across the park rangers and Beat 8. Beat 8, important clarification, there were 5 additional officers added to each shift. The Beat 8 expenditures, as I referenced on the previous slide, started in July of 2023, which would be fiscal year 2024. At that time, as I referenced before, it was pretty well known that the financial conditions were deteriorating, and that in the long term, after the ARPA funds ran out, we would no longer be able to afford Beat 8. And so my understanding in talking to Chief Barner was that they decided not to actually go through the work of creating Beat 8, but instead having the additional staffing on every shift, which is staffing augmentation to the community, but no actual Beat 8. And if anybody has any questions about that, Brian can answer those questions later. So finally, ending with the staffing and employee costs, just very quickly, I want to point out that all of these next slides are basically net changes from 2016 to 2026 effectively, or FY26 with the adopted budget. So it spans a little over 10 years. Electric went up 19 positions. A lot of the position increases in electric, and frankly, the next few there are due to federal and state regulatory requirements and infrastructure needs of each of those major enterprise funds. There were some additional positions added to airports as they continue to have pressure on their workload, and those are funded by fees that are collected at the airport. Internal service funds, these are funds that are split throughout the entire city. Each of them have slightly different percentages of impact to the general fund. Building maintenance was increased by 5 positions. Communications was newly formed, so that's a +3. And there's a variety of other increases. It's important to note all of these have different varying impacts on the general fund, and in some cases, the demand from enterprise funds was to get a higher level of service. I'll use fleet as an example. There is a dedicated mechanic that I believe REU pays for because they wanted a higher level of service from fleet. And so these are modifications to provide services to all of our city operations, not just the general fund. Next up is general fund. These are departments that have some sort of staff, like funding associated with them. The bottom half of the list is the funding of the cost allocation plan. So again, those positions provide services to the entire city. But the top half of that list is either funded through their program revenues or different revenues associated to them. So in the case of streets, it's funded by gas tax. engineering does work for all of the city departments. Finally, the general fund. General fund, this is true blue general fund positions. Fire increased by 16. 15 of those are charged to REU for wildfire mitigation. Police increased by 26 positions. 13 had an associated funding source, and 13 are funded from the general fund. Community services admin increased by 1. Parks is probably the next largest on there, and they had a 21 position increase. 7 of those are wildfire mitigation funded, and 8 of those are funded by grants. And then there's other ones that were approved based on the impacts of new parks coming online. Specifically, some of our new parks are part of what's called landscape maintenance districts, and we have a responsibility of effort to those park facilities as a requirement of the general fund component of those parks. And then recreation is up 2 positions, and the Reading Sports Complex is up 2 positions. The next one there at the bottom is development services. They're up 9 positions. 5 of those were associated to new funding around code enforcement efforts with cannabis taxes, STRs, CDBG funds a position, and then the other ones are actually a result of more demands on service. What typically happens is building gets really busy. They tend to be understaffed. We're collecting a lot of fees, and there's a requirement that you can't collect more fees than the expense to perform the service. And so there's a little bit of a back and forth that happens depending on the level of work that is being demanded of that department. Finally, getting to the MOU and wage modifications, these were all collectively bargained with the exception of the unrepresented updates. They were in line with Council Policy 206, which outlines competitive compensation. There were full compensation studies done in many cases, and they were all approved by council with fiscal impact statements included. Importantly, and this goes back a little further than my history or my timeline does, but there's oftentimes some concessions that are part of those agreements, such as increases to health insurance cost shares, PERS cost share, and PARS cost share. The goal of council has been to have employees pay 50% of their normal cost towards their PERS and PARS and 20% of the cost of the health insurance. Next, this was a graph that was presented by the previous city manager on January of 2022 that kind of shows relative to CPI and Social Security increases from 2007 to the current time, the flattening of wages and why there were wage increases happening. I'm not going to comment on it. I just think it's a useful data point as part of what was happening at that time. This is a list of the MOU modifications. If you read my report or are interested in my report, I'm not going to go over all of these, but it goes back all the way to 2021. There's links in the report. You can go review each of those modifications that were presented at the time, and there's not video links on these ones, but if you wanted to, you could actually go find the videos. Important to talk about employee compensation is just to understand what our employees paying and understanding the full compensation package, and importantly, how that might not be in alignment with every other municipality in our area. So employees typically are paying roughly 50% of the normal cost towards their CalPERS and their PARS. The most extreme example is our police officers pay about 19% towards their CalPERS. My understanding is that is much higher than most other municipalities. Page 42 and 43 provide a detailed breakdown by union and tier of the different cost shares by each of the unions. And then every single MOU now pays 20% of the group health premiums. I also think it's important to know that city employees are not covered by Social Security, so they don't pay into Social Security, and nor do we as an employer. Finally, unfunded liabilities have increased. I would just offer that these increased for a variety of factors. I'll get into the details of talking to our actuarial, what percentage of these were actually associated to wage and personnel increases. But overall, from 2020 to 2025, the net across CalPERS miscellaneous safety and PARS is a $40 million increase. I do like to point out PARS because sometimes it feels like we're on a never-ending journey with unfunded liability. But I will say prior councils and management have always made the decision to continue to pay PARs on the original 20-year amortization schedule, and that actually has become fully funded as of our most recent valuation. And so just to discuss again, what is unfunded liability? It's a cost of the plan. So simple ways, there's less assets available to the plan than there are liabilities. And effectively, we have to pay that difference. Typically, that's amortized over 20 years now. And just for context, our miscellaneous plan is currently at a funding ratio of 64%. Our safety plan is at a funded ratio of 61%. And our PARS, as you can see there, is over 100% funded now. And so this is a cost of retirees and active employees. Particularly, there would be more unfunded liability associated to active employees, but PERS does not provide us any breakdown by employee, and it, as I say, it's a cost of the plan. As I was working on this, I reached out to our actuarial and I asked the question, how much of the increase is associated to pay changes? And her answer was that it's pay in total. So if you add new positions and or give raises that are in excess of the PERS assumption of 2.785%, then there will be an unfunded liability. The important context here is that is one measurement of many measurements that PERS is measuring against actual results to determine if it came in over or under the assumption in any given year. And then from time to time, they do change those assumptions, the most significant of which was back in fiscal year 2017, they changed their discount rate assumptions in the future. And so of that, through talking to her, I found out 31% of the increase through fiscal year 2024 was associated to wages, 50% of the increase through FY25, which is what's on the screen here. And I only brought up those two numbers because it shows some of the potential volatility that can be referenced in those numbers, and we will continue to monitor as we move forward into the future. And with that, I'm going to take a drink of water. Thank you all for your time.
All right. Everybody take a drink. Ready? Public comment? Did I read this thing already? Yeah. Denise Maxwell, you're up first. Mike Quinn, you're on deck. Pamela McNeil, you're number 3.
Good evening. My comments are also going to focus on the 2022 tax year, because that is where I think the misstep possibly occurred. It was in February 17th, 2022, that a special meeting was held and items 3A and 3B were brought to council.
Could you pull that mic down to your mouth so we can put it? Yeah, thank you so much.
And items 3A and 3B were brought to city council. Item 3B was entitled, Consider Approval of New Expenditures for the City of Reading's General Fund. In the background analysis section of the report, the city manager informed the city council that current revenues had outpaced budgeted revenues significantly. And they had, probably mostly due to COVID. He also stated that it is that the expectation that moderate growth would continue after budget adjustments were made. Then he went on to suggest expenditures, which were laid out in the report year by year and averaged $3.6 million per year to $8.9 million per year. It was in March 15th of 22, that the 10-year plan was readopted, I should say, from the budget year. And in that plan, the forecasted revenues, increased revenues, were $3.9 million in year 2 of the budget. And the error that I think got made was that $3.9 million, almost $4 million, was carried into year 3 of the 10-year plan. And once it got into year 3 of the 10-year plan, the increases that Mr. Robinette talked about of 2.5% were then applied to it. So it not only went into year 3 of the budget, but it also went in with a 2.5% increase, and then that increase was carried out throughout the 10-year plan.
The same thing happened with TOT. The TOT amount was 1.9 million, and that increase got carried out into year 3, plus an additional 4%. And year after year, it went up additional 4%. In Councilmember Audette's report, Chapter 4, that is where she talks about the general fund getting $65 million of revenue just with these 2 adjustments alone. And that set the tone for creating a very healthy reserve with plenty of room to make increased expenditures for things like raises and new positions. 19 new positions, I believe, were approved with that very one-step move. Unfortunately, it appears that the healthy reserves created by carrying these increased revenues in this 10-year plan did not also carry the council-approved expenditures throughout the 10-year plan. The fiscal impact section of the city manager's item 3B did mention that the budget resolution for the increased spending would only cover year 1 and year 2.
Okay,
And the
thank you.
balance-
We appreciate it. We got a long way to go. Sorry. Mike Quinn, you're up. Pamela McNeil.
Mike Quinn, citizen, former finance officer in McLeod. You may laugh a little bit and say McLeod to Reading. Reading's just McLeod on steroids. Same funds, same enterprise funds, government funds, same budgeting, everything, just smaller numbers. So I was interested when I saw what Ms. Audette put out and started looking into it. One thing I noticed right away was you don't budget your balance sheet. You don't budget your balance sheet, you're not going to know where you're at. You're never going to know how you're going to get to the proper net change in financial position, because that comes from a balance sheet. And there's balance sheet items that do not appear on your income statements. And a lot of that has to do with reserve accounts, earnings from reserve accounts and things like that. So you've got to be careful doing that. On the unfunded liabilities, I found that the town of McLeod had $6 million unfunded liabilities, but I found a way around it. And it's something that the City of Reading has not done. CEPPT plan, we reduced one set of them, which was the OPEB, by 2/3 in 3 years, just by putting some money from our reserve account into a PERS reserve account. We never lost control of it. We had a checkbook, we could write on it anytime we wanted to, and they took the amount and discounted it, the amount we're gonna have. So we started out with $3 million. In 3 years, we were down to $1 million. If you'd have done the same thing here, you're right now at $60 million with your OPEB. That's been available since 2017. 2 years ago, they went for the retirement account, CEPPT plan. Exact same thing's gonna happen. You put money from your reserve account into their reserve account, you're earning, you get to choose what type of plan you wanna earn on, and it starts reducing it. Immediately, they say because you recognize the fact that you have unfunded liabilities, you get a better discount rate on it, and the money goes down. When you get to a certain point, it's gonna start paying for itself. So it's a cash flow item. Only is gonna show up on your balance sheet. If you don't budget a balance sheet, you're never gonna see these types of things that happen. So I was very impressed. Ms. Audette, I never agreed with a lot of your votes, but the fact that you did this, from a financial point of view and stuff like that, and I've talked with Mr. Robinette about some of these things too, it's just things that we need to talk about. And thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you. Pamela, you're up next. Nick Gardner, you're on deck.
I'll pass, Jack.
Okay. Gary Perrott, said that
Good
right, you're on deck.
afternoon, City Council members. I've been a citizen of Reading all my life. I've seen lots of changes, lots of council members, some good, some bad, but I have to give you a lot of credit for your transparency today. I just found out about this meeting this afternoon, so I'm ill-prepared on some aspects. What I'm here to say briefly is I object of you raising a sales tax, because whether or not you carry the mistakes of the history and past of how the city was run. It's what we do moving forward. And again, I commend your display of transparency. But government is changing today, and so are the people. And what do we want? What do we want to say to our children and future citizens? And I don't think this is where we want to go. Our population has decreased. What isn't transparent is salaries. I'd like to put up on a billboard on Eureka Way and Hilltop Drive the salaries of the top city employees, because they're hefty and they've been hefty in the past. And what isn't transparent is the pensions that were hefty, and we're making up for it. And granted, what you're planning is fabulous, but we have a great resource. We have city utilities. You could offer cut utilities for more businesses to come in, manufacturers, or to attract that, or to attract families. Instead, it's doing the opposite. It's moving people out of our state and out of our city. It's no longer attractive, much less mortgages are collapsing. I've seen so many small businessmen hang it up, and you want to charge more to the consumer? It's how the city is managed and held accountable, and that should be transparent. And you are to us, but it comes from people being given hefty pensions, and now we have to make up for it. So I'm just encouraging you to try to find a way to make up that difference if possible, and don't lay it on the public. Everything is attached to fees and
Thank you.
taxes.
All right, Gary, you're up. Deidre or DD Holiday, you're on deck.
I'm Gary Perot. I am publisher of a new news portal called Shasta Unfiltered, and I am not an accountant. And so a lot of what I just saw sounded good. You were being praised for your transparency. I don't know if that's really transparent, and I have someone on my staff who did a great report on Council Members Audette's recent report, and I've been in meetings with other citizens who have been listening to Councilmember Audette, and they were very sympathetic to what she had to say. And I think what our readers want is transparency. And in order to achieve that with the citizens of Reading, I believe that you have to bring it together and not just look at one person who's bringing up challenging charges or assertions. You really have to work as a team, and you have to focus on transparency so that we can trust you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Deidre and Jeff. Odette, you're up. You're up next.
Got to lower this foot after Gary. I too have heard some information. Councilmember Audette has been very generous with her time in coming and reporting to us some of her findings, and it's statements like these that brought me here today. No actual budgetary numbers have been presented to the City Council for the past 2 years, and most of the members are okay with that. We spent $13 million of our reserves in the last year and a half, and reserves are down to $7 million. We haven't stuck to the budget, overspending $5.6 million and then another $4 million, expecting it to come from COVID stimulating business. For 13 quarters, we have fallen below projections, and we give raises every time. There are $6.8 million in reserves now, but the city announces $9 million. Measure A has been pitched as new spending, but it won't be new spending. It will be used to catch up. My impression is that City Council is not thoroughly or clearly apprised of the budget status, and your constituency has entrusted you as watchers on the wall for the Reading's financial commitments and stewardship. Councilmember Audette has even expressed regrets over some of her own decisions, and I really I commend you for that, for your transparency and humility to state things like that in public. And I really appreciate the hours upon hours that you've spent to try to ferret out where things stood and what it was like. So thank you for that. And I'd like to request of the City Council that you do what it takes to stop the free fall of city reserves, to stabilize the budget, to institute changes in how budgetary updates are reported, so you all have a clear picture of our status and your constituents can more easily review and understand it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, you're up. And Leslie, you're on deck.
Thank you, council members. I come to you today as a citizen concerned about the city's financial standing. You should be too.
You raise
I've
your
had a
mic
front row
up, Jeff.
I've had a front row seat for the last 8 months as Councilwoman Audette has hosted numerous CPAs, former city finance directors, former city managers, local CFOs, business leaders, along with college accounting professors to assist in the vetting of our city's budget. This is an invested and thoughtful civic leader asking for answers, and answers after today I think we're still waiting for. I'm not only the proud husband of Councilwoman Audette, I'm also a finance professional that's uniquely qualified to express some of these concerns. In addition to an undergraduate degree in business with an emphasis in organizational behavior, I hold a certificate of executive leadership from Stanford Graduate School of Business and a finance certification from Wharton School of Business. When I see a lack of clarity in some of the financial reporting, the software blaming, the deflection and defensiveness of responsible parties within the city, my concern grows by the meeting. This is not the behavior of responsible leaders. It's the behavior of leaders skirting responsibility. While there are certainly nuanced differences between municipal finance and traditional finance, the core tenets remain the same. In fact, the standard for transparency in municipal finance is even greater because the money's the people's. Transparency is a word that this council likes to use, but I would say rarely exhibits. By definition, it's the quality of being open to public scrutiny. Does allowing the OpenGov software to expire in 2023 facilitate greater transparency? It does not. Does 3 of our 5 council members not asking a single question that's budget related in open sessions throughout this entire process facilitate increased transparency? I would say no. Does making the city finance director also your treasurer allow for increased fiduciary oversight? In fact, it does exactly the opposite. Does the city spending $500,000 from the general fund to get Measure A on the 2025 ballot versus $30,000 for it to be on the 2026 ballot exercise fiscal responsibility in any way? Not even close. I mean, I'm assuming we're in great financial standing if we're willing to make a $500,000 gamble on Measure A in this election cycle. I find it especially curious when we have council members remaining silent on the city's financial standing in council meetings, yet willing to go on the news to discuss how passing Measure A is critical to Reading's budget and public safety. You see, when you ignore the budget issue in this room and use that same issue to serve your tax increase agenda on the news, all trust is lost. There are 2 things about finance that anyone in the industry will tell you. Number 1 is you need context for numbers to make sense. Yeah. That's what financial statements do by their very definition.
Appreciate it. Leslie, you're up. Steve Kahn, you're on deck. Okay.
I think he's accurate when he says that Jack doesn't want to hear number 2, because I asked number 2, I would have said it, but that's been my experience watching this board, is 3 of you don't want to hear it. You want to be told what to think, and they already have their votes counted, and you don't want to hear it, and you don't want to answer for it, and you don't want to ask the questions. Which brings me to what's probably going to be a very unpopular comment. Patrick Henry Jones sat on this board, and he talked about almost every one of the issues that Mr. Robinette said are what crippled our budget, what crippled and created this deficit, including PERS and all of those unfunded liabilities. Yet he was treated the way Councilwoman Audette's being treated now. He was laughed out of his seat. He was told, "You're asking dumb questions. Why are you doing this? You're just looking to create a problem." And he was treated the way she's being treated. Now, that was 2006 through 2014. Had we listened, we would have been prepared in 2017. We would have been prepared when we ended up having reserves to put money aside and maybe do what this gentleman from McLeod said and start putting things where they need to be and solving our own problems. But instead, we told him, stop asking stupid questions, stop being difficult, go with the flow, rubber stamp what you're supposed to rubber stamp, and sitting there with a smile on your face, pretending like you're doing the will of the people when really you're doing nothing. And if we do that same thing, we are to learn from history, or history is doomed to repeat itself. Councilwoman Audette has put herself in a place where she has nothing to gain from this, where she has made herself look like the pariah, where Mr. Munns, she sat here and was the only one that defended your vote and your position and held up what she should have done in support of you, only to have you turn around and mean girl her with the other two next to you. If we do not use caution and follow the example of her, we're going to repeat history and do the same thing that we did. We're going to laugh the one person asking the good questions out of that seat. This public demands more. And I didn't even get to any of the notes that I actually wanted to say, because that point drives home more than anything else. Do not let history repeat itself. Start asking the hard questions. Dr. Danuka, I love you. I will champion for you. But if you do not start standing up and asking the hard questions, I will be extremely disappointed.
Benjamin Noane, and then Alyssa Pitts.
So, good evening, Mayor and the council. So my name is Benjamin Noane and I live in Reading. So two stories are being told about the budget. One says money went missing. The other says the plan's balanced, reserves meet policy, and the revenue assumptions were set by you in public. What residents are seeing right now is drama that could have been avoided. The city's own reports say three simple things. The adopted biennial budget projects small surpluses. The plan is built to finish each year at above the 10% reserve policy, and if reserves dip below policy, then a corrective plan is required. This spring, the council directed staff to use the conservative sales tax growth to 2% for the next 2 years and then 2.5% for the long term. Those are choices, and it's not hidden. Staff briefed through the regular quarterly, mid-year, and mid-cycle updates when revenue slowed. They said so. You adjusted spending, mostly through attrition and operations, to hold balance. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's how the policy is supposed to work. Now, as for accountability, Councilmember Audette launched a social media campaign and published her findings document that has now triggered intense discussions, hours of staff work, and another report in addition to the yearly budget to answer her claims and this special meeting. And when the official response came out, she publicly called it semantics and a charade and demanded yet another process. One council member can raise concerns. One council member should not keep the city on a treadmill of accusations that ignore what is already on the record. There's also the credibility problem. In 2023, Councilmember Audette voted to approve the very compensation adjustments she is now admonishing. In 2023, she used the standard rationale cities and agency use everywhere. Retention and recruitment. Keep experienced people. Stay competitive so police, fire, and key staff don't walk. That was the argument then. And today she attacks those same decisions as if she had no part in them. So if this is your concern, is ongoing costs, use the tools you already adopted. Keep the revenue assumptions conservative. Publish reserve status plainly, and when trends soften, adjust it early. It's boring, and it works. But I want to address the tone. Calling staff work a charade does not build trust. It drags us into more meetings to relitigate the same points, and it erodes confidence to the very numbers that let you plan and patrol coverage, fire response, and park maintenance. So finally, there's the tax measure. This is not a bailout, it's a choice. It funds what we want and deserve as a community: reliable patrol coverage, faster fire and medical response, safer streets, and open and clean parks, paired with a clear spending plan, independent oversight, and quarterly dashboards, and people will support what they can verify. We can debate priorities without inventing crisis, use numbers in the reports and clips from your meetings and votes this council actually took. That's how we keep the trust, and that's how we keep Reading moving. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Alyssa?
Hi, good evening. I'm surprised you cannot hear my heart beating. I hate being up here. My name is Alyssa. I have a bachelor's of science in nursing and a master's in political management and public policy, an odd career path, I know. I've also sat in more council meetings than I can count over the last almost decade, arguably more than most in this room. I sit in the same spot in that back corner, and I watch and I listen, and I almost never speak. I do not own a business or manage a corporation. In my line of work, I'm a number 2, and I love that position. I love being behind the scenes, and I love doing the gritty, often thankless work of being a staffer. And finally, I have a history of friendship with Councilwoman Audette. We've been in the trenches together in the political world, in strategy and problem solving, and I believe I know who you are at your core. I've also actually read, both reports start to finish. Math is not my thing and has never been my strongest subject, so it took me longer than it should have, but I did the work because understanding before judgment matters. All of that places me in a very unique position to speak tonight. I have a quick story. Almost 2 years ago, I got a call that a very close family friend of mine, someone we knew as strong and healthy, had been rushed to the hospital, and the outlook was grim. He was on a ventilator in the ICU under the care of a specialized physician. I dropped everything and raced up I-5 to Southern Oregon. Before I arrived, I got the call no one ever wants to get. He was gone. While family and friends gathered at their home to comfort his wife and children, I drove straight to the hospital. I needed to understand. The ICU doctor sat with me for over an hour, walking me through every step, what they tried, the choices they made, how deeply her team cared for him. There were rapidly changing physiological circumstances beyond their control, and they had done their best. His death wasn't her fault. It wasn't any medical professional's fault. They made the best possible decisions with the information they had at the time. And I believe that's exactly the lesson this moment demands of us. A struggling budget doesn't mean our staff failed. It reflects a series of council decisions made over years with the best information available then. Isn't that what leadership is? Making the best call you can with the data you have, not pretending you had tomorrow's answers yesterday. The economy is constantly shifting. Pretending it's not is both foolish and wasteful. Calling it corruption instead of acknowledging a lack of understanding or evolving circumstances doesn't make us look strong. It misleads the public and erodes trust. Councilmember Audette, you know what it's like to be on both sides of the dais. You know what it means to serve, to support, to steady the political ship as a staffer and a number 2. You also know how it feels to be vilified by your superiors. You are a brilliant strategist. Prior to going to grad school, much of what I learned about political navigation I learned from you, and I see the political play here and how it benefits you for whatever's next. Hindsight will always be 20/20, and leadership will never be about getting it right 100% of the time. That's impossible. But leadership is about being brave enough to pivot when you're wrong, even if it costs you.
All right. Councilmember Resner.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who has sat here through finance report. Director Robinette does not usually get so much attention because we put finance usually at the end. So I'm sure that he thoroughly enjoyed having a full room to present to, because most people do not find finance super fun and exhilarating I'm thankful that Director Robinette does. I would also like to just take a moment to recenter this body. And I have pages and pages of notes that I am going to refer to because, as you can all imagine, reading through hundreds of pages required some note-taking. I want to just remind us that City Council is a policy-making body. Our authority is not in the day-to-day operations or management of the city. We are not involved in daily personnel decisions. That is handled by the folks who sit in the front seat and in the front seats here and along this dais. Our authority is oversight. It's setting policy and it's best serving the public. It's clearly laid out in an org chart, who answers to who, and within our council policies, which were reviewed earlier and mentioned in the slides. I think in order to sort of tell a story, I would like to let you know what it is that I did to prep for this meeting. I have read through all of these documents, and like the big nerd that I have, it is color coordinated, and I asked of directors and staff a lot of questions. I actually read these documents. I did not use summary tools. I did not insert this into ChatGPT and ask for some talking points here. And as I have asked my plethora of questions and read through things, I have found no corruption. There is not a corruption issue here. And I believe that anybody who actually takes the time, and I will warn you, it will take you hours. It will take you hours, especially if you like a highlighter and a sticky note. It will take you hours to pour through this, and you will come to the same conclusion. What actually happened here is that there were multiple councils that made decisions over several years. Those decisions, like said by a handful of people in this room, were made with the best decision, the best information and the best decisions possible that they had at that specific time. I sat on this council from 2018 to 2022. Councilmember Audette began her term in 2022, and I think that everyone in this room can acknowledge that hindsight is and will always be 2020. I think that history has shown us that there are things we can identify where maybe a problem started after years and years have passed. But where I think that the actual issue lies, in my honest assessment, is not with staff and not with staff decisions. There was not anything that was information that was withheld from this governing body from any of those councils over the years, but there were two areas that I can identify. One, we had a change in presidency. And during that change in presidency, we saw rapid inflation. And anybody who lived here during the Great Recession understands and has lived through that inflation and recessions hit our rural communities the hardest, and we have a hard time bouncing back. Council decisions also during that time frame passed out raises. Those are the two things that I can identify within reading all of these reports. And because it is heavily discussed and a topic that also many of our public commenters mentioned is raises. It is a hot topic in our community, and because of that, I would like to go through the record because it sounds a little muddy when it's out there online and sometimes in here. Also, if you have been sitting here the last 6 months, Councilmember Audette has made a couple of innuendos or alluded to the fact that there was someone who sat on the dais during 2022 when there were raises handed out, and I would just like to let everybody know that that person is me, that she is correct. And so I'd like to cover specifically what the landscapes looked like during those decisions, because that matters. The information we had matters. So like I said, I sat on this dais from 2018 to 2022. I am actually very proud of the financial stability that we created. And I wish that there was another member of past council in this room who I could look to, because we spent hours poring over budgets and we worked really hard to put us in that sort of stable position. Reserves were at an all-time high. We had a decade of outperforming projections. Multiple years, you heard Director Robinette referred to this, we had multiple years of historical growth. We raised the reserves policy from 5%, which it had been before, to 10%. We doubled the reserves, and we were able to do that because we had had historical growth. It was 2020, and we thought that the conservative thing to do so that we could weather future storms, like what came next, is to increase that to 10%. During that time, we were struggling with what was mentioned, I believe, by Mr. Nguyen, with retention, and we asked staff to do a compensation study. And staff came back to a compensation study, and with that data, we brought staff closer to market rate and competitive wages. We were having a difficult time at competing in the private sector and with other municipalities. I believed then, and I believe now, which I will continue to say, that honoring those who serve this community and protect this community when the numbers allow it is the right thing to do. Paying people a competitive wage is the right thing to do when we can afford it. I will also repeat in that who protect us piece that police and fire services matter. And the question that I ask every single time that I'm wondering what somebody is worth is, what is it worth to you to have a cop or a firefighter show up to your house or to your family member's house when you are in need? If we are asking someone to potentially run into a burning building or to take a bullet and leave a widow with children, what is that person worth? And in my opinion, I will always believe that a competitive rate competing with other government entities and the private sector is the honorable thing to do. I will circle back to, we were in good financial standing when we did that, and because of that, we were able to put 10%. Now, 2022, when Councilmember Audette came onto this, was a very different reality. The budget was already tightening. You heard Director Robinette mention that there was a tone shift at the end of November, at the end of 2022. But in the beginning of 2023, we are in a drastic shift when you start hearing staff report. If you go back and you look at the videos that were linked in this report, within the first 60 seconds of almost every single video, Director Robinette or some member of staff makes some comment that sounds like, "Sorry to be Eeyore up here again," or "Sorry to be the bearer of bad news when I'm presenting you the finances. Hey, I wish I had a better outcome or a better outlook on what it is that's going on with finances or with sales tax." It was very clear, quarter after quarter, every update, that it was rough and that finances were very tight and that we were not hitting the mark. But this also was occurring while Councilmember Audette was running for higher office and running for a state seat. And during that campaign season, while other people warned of what was going on and that cuts were being made publicly, she was saying, "That's just someone trying to create a crisis. They're being dramatic. It's not that bad." This is not that there was a lack of information. This is a lack of understanding, and that lack of understanding produced $4 million worth of raises under a drastically different financial landscape every single year to our general fund. I think that that record is really important. And so now, like I said, we went through how I prepped to this meeting, how it is that we got here, what the record looks like. So I want to go back to what I said originally, what our job is. Our job is to make the best decisions with the information that we have, and we're policymakers. So I have a couple of policies that we can circle back to. And I have some reasonable reforms that I would like to suggest. I have 5 of them. We can circle back to them, but they are, I would like the finance director to be present in all closed session MOU negotiations so that we can ask every single time exactly what it looks like when we're being presented salaries. I would like an annual grant funding report from each department every year. I would like to reform what our budget workshops look like. For example, I would like if department heads presented each of their own budget. I think there are a couple other things that we can discuss. I also would love if we could implement a policy overview meeting for newly elected council members, because I think often people come on and those council policies that were discussed are not heavily reviewed. And I think a government finance basics course for new city council members would be great. Finally, I really would like to say that I will not be continuing in this charade. That is, in fact, what we're doing. If there are policy changes that anybody here would like to suggest, that is our job. And I will not be entertaining this manufactured crisis because we actually have work to do. And I think that everyone in this room is very aware that we have actual public safety issues. Our local law enforcement is working on the parolees that are living in hotels. We have actual issues. We have sex offenders and violent criminals who are being dropped here from the state, and we need to focus on how it is that we solve those problems. We need to solve those problems. We also, I believe that our sales tax is going to continue to come in lower than our projections. And even though those were very conservative projections, this council needs to give staff the ability to come up with ideas because we're gonna have some really hard decisions to make. And we need to focus on what our job is and moving forward and solving real issues and real problems. I'm gonna be doing the latter thing. Solving our problems. That's it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Resner, for a very passionate presentation and also giving some of the background from 22 and 23 when, at least Mike and we were not here. So thank you very much. I also do appreciate what Ms. Audette has been doing, raising questions. And I always tell as a teacher, and I teach my new doctors, I always say, there's no stupid question, there are only stupid answers. So I really appreciate that you're raising the questions, which are smart questions, and I do appreciate that part. That's how we look at ourselves and improve ourselves. And I mentioned this last time, at least in medical field, we have this a nationwide standard that we go through external audits and external, what we call JACO surveys. For example, that every few years you have these surveys, and that is not meant to be punitive, but it's meant to be asking these questions. What can we do differently next time to improve the things? And I think this exercise does have some value. And it does become contentious at times, which we do not like, but that's how our democratic process works. And I appreciate the civic engagement of every side, including those who are asking tough questions and including those who are trying to answer it. So I do appreciate that. I can tell you about myself that I am more interested. I didn't run for this office just to sit here and feel good about it. I got enough things to do. What my focus is, how do we learn from the past but improve the future, which you rightly said. So just quickly, you already summarized that, but I would say that 3 things I noticed from all this exercise over the last 6 months is, number 1, the projections which were made based on a post-pandemic bounce in sales tax of 16% or 6% later on, they were unrealistic. Had I been there, I would have said, no. I'm a fiscal conservative, I run a business, good times don't last. So let's not believe those things. I would have said that. There was a delay in correcting those projections, and there were raises which in some ways were kind of needed, but at the same time, were not something which we could sustain in long term. But those are the lessons we can learn for the future. I'm not here to penalize who made the decision and how they made the decision. What I'm here to is to learn. This is what I would say, that at this point of time, I do not see any corruption so far, or any fraud or any deception. What I do see is mistakes which were made, and we need to learn from them. And what do I suggest we do in the future? Number one, I would suggest that we look at two things. One is, how do we cut the cost going forward? Because basically, you can't cheat the numbers. If 2 and 2 are 4, they are 4. You cannot make them 5 or 26 or 3 or 0. So we reduce our cost. And the second thing is, how do we grow our economy and make our place more attractive? We need to unite together and focus on those two things. My suggestion is, Ms. Audette has done a wonderful job in raising these questions, and maybe she can take it as her next project to figure out how to reduce expenses for our city. And I would be very supportive of that if she's willing to spend her energy and expertise in that to bring ideas, how do we reduce the cost going forward? What I would ask you is, what I would urge you is, rather than going over the past at this point, let's look in the future, how do we reduce cost? And I would love for you to take that as a project. I'll be supportive of that. Second part, which is more important, is how do we grow our economy? And we really need to unite together and look forward and how to bring next economic engine here. The state and the federal government are never going to give us anything. Whatever grants they give, basically they're just recirculating our money, going to the federal government, Washington, D.C. or state, and they throw some peanuts back at us, and some of those dollars are lost, some of those are stolen when they come back from D.C. or state. We need to figure out how to do it ourselves. How do we grow our own economy? And that requires two. One is some creative thinking, that what's going to be the next economic engine for our city, our area, our county for next 5, 10, 20, 50 years. We need to focus on that. And second, how do we make the place more attractive, which requires two things, public safety and services. And we need to we have our work cut out. It's not going to be easy. So that's what I'm interested in. I would like to focus on that one. I would like Danessa to focus on how to cut the cost. One more thing I want to say is that I'm open to an external audit, even though we have annual audits, but I don't mind having, as I mentioned earlier, about every few years we have an external audit, to not to look into the financial balancing thing, but to actually figuring out how can we make better decision next time. I'm looking into those things, that if we made the decisions which we made, can we improve the decision-making process next time? Second thing, about the Proposition A, I do want to make a pledge to the public. There has been a lot of questions and conflicts and contention about this. This is not something I put or any city council member put on the ballot. Now, we may argue about it, whether it's good or bad, but I have full faith in our public that they will make the decision that is best for our public. I will make a pledge that whatever is the outcome, I will follow it. I'll follow it, abide by it in the letter and spirit. Whatever is the outcome, we will not change the allocation. If it passes, if it does not pass, that is fine too. We will do what we need to do, but I'll make a pledge that we will not change anything in the letter and the spirit of this proposition if it does pass. Thank you.
Those were two really good speeches. I don't know how I follow that, but I will try to be as eloquent as you guys. But first, I do want to thank everyone for coming here. There's a lot of people in the room, and there's certainly more that could have been here, maybe if the time worked out. And we'll be lucky if we get maybe 200 or 300 or 400 views online. Maybe we'll get 1,000. I don't know. It's kind of fun to see when people do check in. The information is really exciting to some. I love the people that like to be part of the process, and that's why you're here. Thank you. I love the discussion. I love the discussion even with people I disagree with. And It's good that we have healthy discussion even when we agree or disagree. We need representation of people on all sides. It wouldn't be a great thing if all 5 of us disagreed every single time. To get things done and meaningful change, we need to have healthy conversation. The noise has been really, really loud this year. This is my first year on the council, and I feel like it's been louder this year than any other years. Sometimes the noise gets really loud, the information gets out that, it gets us angry, it gets the public angry. And I remember the time I drove my daughter's car to Wisconsin in August, and it was a 31-hour drive over 5 days. And I just rehearsed in my mind all the things I felt like I wanted to say. And it was a good thing I drove because I didn't say 99% of it. I just had to really filter this discussion and slow down a little bit and try to find ways how I can communicate to people, how I can receive communication from others, where really, if we take down the noise a little bit and we were just really committed to working together and be willing to listen to ideas from people that we disagree with, we can flush that stuff out. It's good to hear from people of all people here. So I'm not going to agree with everybody in the room every single time, and you're not going to agree with me, but when we work together, we can really get a lot of things done, and we got to bring down the noise a little bit. So we've had our chance this year to be noisy. What does it look like in the future? We've got to come together because we look like children for the last 9 months. I feel like after every meeting, it's probably about 5 glasses of wine, just to try to bring it down a little bit and to rehash what the heck just happened here. And it just feels like we could have got a lot more accomplished just through meaningful conversation, bringing down the noise and just saying, are we really here to work together, or are we after political ambitions? Are we trying to set the stage to do something in the future? What are we really after? Are we really after to do the best thing for the city and the best thing for the people, to work with government? Or we have some sort of agenda to where we're just trying to do something meaningful for ourselves? We cannot be selfish. And I have to put myself in check many times and think, what am I really trying to accomplish? What are we really after? Set aside our egos. Let's work together. We have great staff. There's a lot of smart people in this room. There's people sitting in the audience. I can certainly say you're smarter than me in some areas. I have to lean on you. I value your input. We need it. That's how we do it together. There's city staff that I admire so much because, again, they're the brains of each department. We've hired really, really good people. And what I've seen over the past 9 months is this rhetoric gets so loud, it gets so noisy, it gets insulting, we've slandered, we've just done a good job of doing our best job we can to tear people down, and that's just not good. We drive away talent, we drive away people, and the thing I hate the most is just listening to directors all the time when I meet with them and they say, I'm so frustrated, I don't know why I'm here, I want to quit. That's not healthy, it's not good for the city, it doesn't show meaningful discussion to where we can have good partnership and relationships with directors, smart people in the community. We've got to rally together. We've got to work together. We've got to be willing to work with people that we disagree with, people that we just don't like. It's okay to have conversations with those people, but I'm just really after healthy conversation. The budget is hard. I love the movie A League of Their Own. It's a baseball movie. I'm a baseball guy. But what they said is, it's hard. Baseball is hard. It's supposed to be hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it. We like the hard, right? The budget is hard. Not everybody can do this, It doesn't come easy to everybody. It's confusing. And what we've relied on the past 9 months is just bullet points on social media. We've relied on headlines. The report that Greg put together was very, very meaningful. I appreciate Audette taking a stab and putting together 150 pages of information we can dive through. Great. We disagree with a bunch of it. We think it could have been done in a healthier way. But you know what? It's hard stuff. And when we're relying on bullet points on social media, one-line news articles in the subject, the fact is 99.99999%, whatever far as you can go, nobody's going to read Greg's report. Very few are going to read Tanessa's report. We rely on bullet points and subject lines. There is really, really good content in these reports if we read through them. It would actually bring a level of understanding just to go through the report and go, okay, I get it. That makes sense. It goes way beyond the headline and the bullet point of what we see. You'll find value in reading the report and actually getting a really good, educated decision to go, I have a much better understanding of this. And we can work to solve problems because government is not perfect. Things are not perfect. We can actually do things better in the future. But let's set aside our selfish ambition, egos, check it out the door, and come together and really get real things together. I thought hard about this, thinking I'm going to come here, and I think I'm just tired of trying to convince other people to agree with me at times. We've done that for 9 months. So at this point, we disagree in things. We have to move forward. We have a budget that's passed. Let's work to make it better in the future and address the continuing revenue declines. Our sales tax is probably going to continue to decline. It's not great. It's not setting the stage to where things are perfect. We have a lot of hard work to do. I am terrified of the future for our roads. $10 million a year shortfall in the roads. I don't know how we'll ever get that money back without a cut to public safety and police or fire. I've gone through the budget. I watched every budget meeting since 2021, hours and hours and hours of budget meetings because I dove deep. I said, I have to know what's going on. I have to know how these spending decisions were done. I have to have a better pulse of what happened and where are we going? And that took a lot of time, but that's time that not a lot of people can do. But there's so much value in the videos to understand the history, as Councilmember Resner did a really good job talking about, right? It told the story of the past. The council made decisions 4 years ago to spend an awful lot of money in surplus and ARPA funds on police and fire. They put their hands in the crystal ball with the budget director, the city manager, and all kinds of smart people and tried to make the best guess of what was best for the public and what they thought was going to happen. It didn't quite work out that way, but we got a lot of police and fire out of it. Now we just figured out we can't afford them. So we had to eliminate some positions. Okay, that's how we cut about $8, $9, $10 million, a lot of money out of our budget to balance things. We had a lot of support with police and fire. We just go back to levels that we had in the past. And that stinks, but we're operating okay. We can certainly do better. But where's the $10 million for the roads ever gonna come from without more cuts to police and fire? I've gone through this budget. I've looked, we can make some cuts. We could cut $250,000, $500,000, $1 million. We could do 25% pay cuts to management. We could eliminate some positions. It only gives us like $1 million or $2 million. It still doesn't give us $10 million for roads unless we cut public safety, police and fire. So I'm just committed to saying we're gonna disagree on things. We need to work together. We need to refine this budget. We need to do a better job, but let's put our collective thoughts together. I'm not arguing over this budget that we just passed anymore. Things happened 4 years ago. We learned from the past, as Councilmember Danuka said. We're moving forward. We have real city issues to deal with. Our roads, our parolees that are staying in hotels, our parks, our infrastructure that's falling apart. We have real city issues. We've had our time for 10 months to just argue and bicker like children here over the budget. But let's put our collective minds together. Let's move forward. I definitely love some of the ideas that came here. From Councilor Resner and Danuka. Great ideas there. I could support those. There's a real good dialogue. But as far as here, thank you, Greg, our finance director, for putting in countless hours, staff time, exhausting the department, dealing with this. And we have a great finance team. I just really appreciate the work that was done. We have great city staff. Let's try not to call and insult each other, slander, and do all sorts of things. Let's work together, put good minds together, bring down the tone, and let's just be willing to work with people we disagree with and we dislike. And that's it. Thank you for the response to the budget. It's confusing as heck. It's supposed to be hard, but we just move forward. Thank you. Sorry.
I just wanted to say, first of all, let's not insult children. Children are pretty good. Just wanted to say that because you mentioned that twice. I like children, they fight and forget. Second, more serious thought. I would add that if we can have going forward a financial oversight committee, I think that's something we should consider. Maybe Mike Quinn brought a good ideas about the CTBT and retirement plans. I'm sure there are great ideas. I'm not the expert, so maybe we guys can consider financial oversight committee on the future budgets, something. Would you guys be open to that?
got about 15 minutes.
Right, so that's,
No PowerPoint.
I can't use my PowerPoint in response to this so that we can actually know what I'm talking about with the documents.
Can you just talk like everybody else did?
Okay, so there's a couple, well, there's about 18,000 things, but we'll try to limit them down. All right, so I have good news for everybody. The report that I did, 150 pages, there, you can run it through whatever system that you want. I do a word search, I think it's like Control F. The word fraud, the word cover-up, the word corruption, money missing, does not appear at all in the report that I did. I've not accused anybody of corruption. I've not accused anybody of fraud. None of that is in that report. I will say a lot of accusations have been made, but they didn't come from me. So when I did this report, it's because when we came to the March 13th budget, I had an understanding that there was a $5 million deficit in our budget. And I was told when they tried to cut an additional 3 cops that the actual deficit was $8 million. And that was stunning to me. And I wanted to go back and to figure out how in the world did we spend, or how are we at an $8 million deficit? I don't remember approving $8 million of spending, to which at that point in March, it had been, maybe 18 or 20 months into the 2-year budget. And so I attempted to go figure out, how did I miss that? How did I miss that we had an $8 million deficit, and where is it? And that led me to some findings, and that led me to more findings, and that led me to more, and it just was so many things that my kitchen had 2 6-foot tables and a buffet. I had 8 years of audits, 8 years of staff reports, which is 4 quarterly reports for each year, fiscal year. I had the budgets going back 8 years to try to figure out what's normal, what's not normal, what's an anomaly, what's not an anomaly. And when I put the report together, it's called Reading Budget Findings because there had been claims made at all of these meetings. Some that I was at, some that I was not at, so I also watched the meetings. There was lots of claims being made. So the claims that are in the report are the claims that came from our city manager or our finance director. And what I set out to do was to, with the paperwork, if you were coming on the council or you're in the public, could you find a substantiation in the documents that were provided? And was the story the same? Because I felt like I had been told one thing, but I was experiencing another at this point, and I was trying to reconcile the two. There is no revisionist history, the only thing I regret now that I know what the financial health was based on mingling of funds and whatnot, and not in a illegal way, but just in an awareness and understanding way, how I missed some of these things. I would not have renewed the contract, which is what the September, we call it raises, but you can look in the documentation. What that was a 2-year contract for Barry. And when I argue with Michael DeQuisto, it's because predominantly what we were approving was a 2-year contract, a renewal contract with him. And the number one thing he asked for in closed session was that it be unanimous. And in that meeting, I asked for closed session discussion to be opened. And that's what him and I were arguing about, was opening of, which we did. We opened that closed session, and we discussed the unanimous vote that he had agreed to in closed session, but then was coming out here and voting no. And he said he didn't have to give his reason. And I said, well, how would I know if I'm making a good decision if you have a good argument? Tell your argument, like this is a team sport. Tell us in closed session, I don't think that's good and here's why, so that I can then go do some research and figure out if what you're saying is true, and maybe I would change my mind, I would be influenced by that. And that is the argument that him and I have. It wasn't about raises, because what happened on that was compression when there was earlier raises for both enterprise and general fund. Those executives that cover all of it had to come back, and the compression, which is not a word I love, it just means if somebody else gets a raise, somebody else gets a raise, because it goes up the chain. And so we were writing those compression issues, which were 5%, 3% over 2 years. So that's the argument that we had. So when I say that I regret my decisions, I don't think that the understanding now financially where we were, knowing that the reserves had ARPA funds mingled into it, and I was not aware of the accounting of both ARPA funds and reserve funds. I wasn't sure what was which and how much it was. It looked like our reserves, when we did that in September of '23, were $23 million. And so even though sales tax was down $1 million, down $1.5 million, even though that was happening, our reserves were double what they were supposed to be. And so there was a sense that, yes, we're watching the sales tax projection because that's our performance. We are guessing what it's going to be, a calculated, educated guess, but it has a performance metric to it. And so you're watching to see that while property taxes is performing well. And so you're balancing the two and making decisions just so because you're keeping an eye on it. But the reserves were massive. So when I went back to look and to try to find some detail, what I found was that there was no detail for me to be able to look through in fiscal year 24, fiscal year ending 24, and fiscal year ending 25. The financial reports, the budget reports were not the same, and they were not producing the same report that we would normally be able to see, which had the cash flow, which had budget to actuals for both revenue and expenditures, and it also had sort of a budget summary, so that whatever the numbers that you're looking at in the staff report, you could get a clarification and an understanding of exactly what that is in the summary reports, which I created a 48-slide PowerPoint for this so that you would not have to just listen to what I'm saying. I could show you the document that I'm talking about. But the mayor has said that I am not allowed to show that tonight. And I think that for this report, I ask that we have an independent group look at my report and assess what was valid, what's not valid, what's accurate, what's inaccurate, and then come back and report to us and ask and give us some remedies about what we can do. And they said, no, they didn't want that. They wanted the finance director to grade his own test. And so that's what we're doing here tonight. We're grading his test. The problem is that, you know, this is a response which I would like to respond to, and I would like to bring clarity, which is why I only got this for about a week, and I spent the time putting a PowerPoint together so it wouldn't be missing each other as to what we're talking about, and so the public could actually see what I'm saying. So the fact that you're not going to allow me to actually show that and show the documents just creates less clarity, less transparency, and less accountability for what it is that we're talking about, because there are plenty of things. There are plenty of things in here that they're scrutiny and they're actually constructive that we need to change. There's this, for instance, the first one that's talking about the Public Works, Admin, and NPDS. For 6 years, it's been reported the same way in the budgets as an internal service fund revenue. So if that really does belong in the general fund, it's been wrong for 6 years in the budget book, and that needs to be changed. So if the cash is there, awesome. But it does mean that our books are inaccurate. And my number one goal in all of this, if you want to know what my motivation is, it is to do my job, which is to have accurate assessments of what our city financials are. That is my goal at all times. And it is my job because I am fiduciarily responsible. It's oversight. It's all the things that we mentioned. It is not about vilifying people. I have spent hours with our finance director. I spent hours with our city manager. I confronted him. I asked him, what do you want to take responsibility for? Your last city council and this city council had no idea that we spent $13 million of reserves. And now that we're aware of it, what do you have to say for the fact that we were all unaware that it had gotten that bad? And he said, fine, I'll do better next time. That was his response. So I have spent exhaustive amount of hours. I didn't just read these reports, I created them, which means I read for months. And I didn't come out here making accusations. I just kept asking, I need more information, I need more information, I need more information, I need the whole picture, because I didn't want to come out here making accusations because I didn't know what was true yet. I just knew things were off. I couldn't find resolutions that said we had spent that much money, and I was looking for answers. So this report, there are many things that are inaccurate, many blatant things. The most important is that this report that Greg Robinette did said that the sales tax alteration was for 1 year. That is abjectly false. It was a 2-year modification, 12.7% the first year, and from the previous modification, 12.72. From where we were when we started the budget to the modification that made. The year over year was 3.89%, and then it went to 2.5%. That led to a $43 million increase in the 10-year sales plan. It means that we had a lot more money that we thought we could spend. And so maybe these raises looked attractive in 2022. But I will tell you, the reserve balance at that point was only 13%. Okay, the reserve balance when we made our modification and our 2-year deal was over 20%. So I think trying to talk about numbers, I literally have a list of things and the documentation to show of how there is something inaccurate or wrong that we can actually fix, because that is the goal. We need accurate financial documents, accurate, and there is tons of inaccuracies. For whatever reason that they exist, it is our job in oversight to correct it and then to move forward. I have had this conversation, I came with this, I spoke to Greg Robinette, I have spoken ad nauseum to all of these people. Many, many times. It's not one time and I didn't get what I wanted and I walked away. No, I've done it many, many times. So when we're talking about this, the fact that I can't actually go through and talk about the substantive issues of our budget is incredibly frustrating, and it again demonstrates that you're not interested in actually fixing what's wrong with our financials and what we've done, and even if we've done them historically, it's inaccurate. It needs to be more precise, especially when you have a downturn. You really have to be careful and know exactly how much you have and don't have. The fact that you guys are sitting up here saying, oh, our sales tax is going to be below projected. Yes, that was an argument I was having in the budget meeting, that this is ridiculous. I put it, he says, I don't know where she's getting this from, 1.6 or 1.4 revenue cast forecast. Where does this 4 to 6 million year-over-year increase? Revenues for 2024 and 2026 were 105 and 106 million. We have them for the next 2 years at 110 and 112. That's $4 to $6 million more of expected revenue. And we're already talking about how sales tax projections are off. It means all this budget is off. So every substantive issue I put in a slide, and I can't show you, and I can't have the argument. So what I would suggest, because the goal is accurate financial documents, accuracy, and that we be precise. And so I think we do need to have, like I asked for the first time, we need to have an independent committee to review our financial documents, which were not included in the presentation, which is section 5 of this report that our finance director did. There are several reports that we haven't gotten for like 2 years, which I also had a slide so you could see exactly what I was talking about. When I say budget to actuals, I brought physical copies so you could see after what it is that I'm talking about, so we're not missing each other. But those reports, it's been 2 years since we've gotten those reports. There's an investment committee that hasn't met since 2022, okay? That they're supposed to be meeting every single year, which is a advisory committee. There are, the payroll wasn't done for 10 months. We've had different, which we've talked about, but this doesn't get addressed. It doesn't get addressed in the report. I can't address it now because I can't show it to you. But this is the kind of stuff, it's substantive. It is not little things, it's not my preferences, it's not the way that it looks. It is the substance of our, he says it in there himself, that those quarterly reports are supposed to include budget to actuals and the cash flow. Giving us one block in a staff report is not the same as a full report for each of the departments and where, and so that we can actually track. So I would, again, I don't know why I should be surprised. I literally spent, I don't even know, 20 or 30 hours putting together a PowerPoint of all of these documents so that there wouldn't be anything missed or anything misrepresented or anything misunderstood, so we could actually get to the bottom of what the issue is and we could solve it. And I'm not allowed to show that to you, which I think is really sad. So I would make the motion that we've done what you guys have asked us to do. He graded his own test, and shockingly, he's passed with flying colors. I don't agree with that. I've graded the test, and I see it as maybe a 50%. So mostly because we agree 50% of the time. Okay, so I do think that we should have an independent committee, whether you want to call it a financial audit committee oversight. Somebody needs to look at both of these reports, because now we have two. And to go through that and to find out what it is that we can actually do to substantively create structures and policy procedures and best practices to get more accurate data from the financial reports that we're putting out. Because our budget is tenuous. I don't think that we're going to hit the mark. It has in there that we're going to have a surplus. I do not think that we're going to have a surplus. And so I think there should be some corrective action. And I would be happy for a committee to come together and to say, you were wrong about all of it and everything is great. Perfect. Please do that. You have two different documents to be able to look through. So I would make the motion that we actually have an independent committee to review both of the documents now and come back with a good idea of some policy changes that we can make. Every single thing that you said, Aaron, every single one of them, I would completely agree. All of the things, Dr. Danuka, that you requested, I would also say, but just because I'm tired of taking all the hits, a $4 million increase with $23 million of increases means that $19 million of increases to our costs in the general fund came from the raises that happened in January of 2022. So if your math is at 4 million were from what happened in September of 23, that means 19 million increase to our to what our costs are for personnel happened just because of those raises. So that's my motion. I will be happy to present my PowerPoint to anybody that wants it. And I will say this again, I will do my best always, and I did spend months trying to persuade this group to vote or to look for things or to have reports or whatever. But if that fails and I think that the public is not being served, I will then go to the public because I work for the public. I will remind you. I will remind you that for months, for 5 or 6 months, I did not go public. I was not on social media. I did not post anything about what I was finding or the issues that I had. I went on the radio because I wanted to save those last 3 cops. That was my goal. But once I discovered that there was so much more there, I dug in to figure it out. And I did not make accusations and I did not go. But once the council was unwilling to actually let me even ask the questions during the budget committee, which I had at least 50 of them, did not let me out and gavelled me down, made the vote, went forward, and it was no more being discussed. I had no option than to go to the people that I work for to say, do you want more of this? Is this what you're looking for? And I did not accuse people of corruption. I did not accuse people of fraud. I literally labeled it findings because I wanted every one of you to be able to find something as well. Not my opinion, not what I have to say, but just the findings, the documents. So it's not enough to watch the videos. I've been here. I listen too. But the documents tell a different story. And my goal is that we have these things reconcile and that in the future, this never happens again. I mean, for that reason alone, so that you never have to have me write another paper, I feel like that should be good motivation. But that is the goal. That's it. This is our job. This is what we signed up for. So I do think that there has not been transparency, and if transparency is that very cute speaker that spoke earlier, is being open to public scrutiny, my husband, being open to public scrutiny, then I would say we have not been open to public scrutiny. And if we are going to open ourselves and be transparent for public scrutiny, there are a list of things that we could do better. And I think it would behoove all of us that it's not me doing it, that it's an independent committee, and I'll be happy to sit on it, and they can tell me I'm wrong, and I can give them my documentation, and I will tell you every place in it that I was wrong. Happy to do that. But we should have somebody independent come in and look at it and really discover what we can do and how we can do it better so we're not in this place again. Because the fact is, all of us get paid a very small amount of money. You get $600 a month. I don't expect you to have your calculator out and your report and writing these things. I don't expect that. So in the future, we have to make sure that the documents that we get and the reports that we have are as transparent as possible and that there's scrutiny on all sides so that we do better. Everybody needs accountability. I can like you the most, and I still am going to hold you responsible for your actions, okay? You still have discipline. These are performance reviews. A budget workshop is a performance review. The idea that everybody here, if you work here, you're above being critiqued is ridiculous. Of course you want to be critiqued, because guess what happens? It makes you better, and we should always want our staff to be better. Always. And so characterizing this as attacking staff is unnecessary, and it deflects from the importance of actually the criticism necessary to be better. And so I would make the motion that we actually take these 2 documents to an independent committee to look at it, and whatever structure we want, we can have them bring back some ideas for structure. Do you each pick somebody? I know, I'd already spoken to Nola Short at the county. She said she would be willing to be on a committee, and we can figure out how we structure it. But I think that's the direction we should go so that somebody can give us good advice and look at it both, and it's not us grading our own work.
Vice Mayor Vitale.
They're good bullet points. The thing I have to go back to is, again, there's been a lot of questions answered through the report. And it goes back to the thing I said again, 99.9% are not going to go back and read the report. We need.
Well, then let me show you that it's not. I literally prepared that. So
Guys,
easy.
let him speak, please.
We need to read the report, and we need to allow the time to actually gather all the information and just stop looking at bullet points and good facts. It's hard to argue, it's hard to debate when we say stuff but we're not reading the stuff, you know? If we want someone to look at this, I'd say at this point, take the 2 reports, send it to the grand jury. If there's somebody sitting here from the grand jury, send it to the grand jury. Let the grand jury look at it. It's free for them to look at it. It won't cost us anything, and we'll get a very good independent analysis. So I would welcome this to go to the grand jury. Why not? I don't think the city would be opposed to that, and the city would be happy to answer those questions. So if there's someone from the grand jury, hear us out. I'm okay with that. Send it there. I would welcome anybody to go look at those documents. Now, I do want to mention one thing. When we talk about doing our job, I've only been here for a year. She's been here for about 3 years. In the first 2 years, she rarely ever met with our finance director. In fact, I heard she might not have ever had one meeting other than orientation in the first 2.5 years. Our finance director even said, I'm not even sure she knew who I was in the first 2.5 years. When she started meeting with them in February and she went to May, she stopped meeting with them in May. She had 3.5 months to take her report and go ask questions, list her concerns and say, hey, I'm really concerned about this information. Let's fact check this. What do you think? But we went 3.5 months without doing anything, and basically we released a report. That's not doing your job, working with your directors and working with government at that point. So I would suggest in the future, really helpful things to do, go meet with your directors, gather information, and fact check stuff, and be willing to wrestle through information and concerns we have. But we have to meet with our directors. But from May to August, not one meeting from May to August, not one meeting.
Did all of it, and emails.
Okay.
Councilmember Resner.
I know that everyone in this room is really hot about all of the feelings that are happening, but what I actually heard from Councilmember Audette was, and looking at nods, is that it appeared that there were 5-0 in unison, that there actually was, while we may have our
Barry Tippin.
thoughts. What?
Just for Barry Tippin.
No. I'm talking about use that Councilmember Danuka suggested items to bring back, which was a finance oversight committee. It looked like that everybody up here nodded. You also said the things that I suggested that you would be amicable to. And
Yeah.
while there are lots of things we could fight over the minutia, I think that it's fantastic. And like I said, my goal is for us to move forward. And I believe that every leader can acknowledge that there are things that we can improve on and things that we can do better. And I think being able to say, where can we improve is a healthy thing to do. And so I'm going to repeat the things that I said before so that any of the directors who need to write them down, or city staff or the clerk. A finance director present in all closed session MOU negotiations. I would like to bring that back. Oh, maybe I should say, I'm making a motion to bring back finance director present in all closed session MOU negotiations. An annual grant funding report by each department, because that gets a little messy sometimes trying to flesh that out. I would like to have reform budget workshops. I would like that to be brought back so we could hash out like what that looks like, what's reviewed, what the outlay is, because I think that really matters so that we're getting clear and productive content. Moving forward, policy overview meeting for newly elected council members and a government finance basics, and then Councilmember Danuka said finance oversight committee. Those are the topics that I would like to bring back in my motion. I understand there are 6. Do I have a second?
I think I can go with that, but we're moving forward, not looking backward.
May I
That's
just,
Yeah.
If I can comment on something along the lines which you guys have said. First of all, this is a mayor's prerogative to decide whether you want the PowerPoint presentation from Ms. Odette or not. I think it's a good idea. It's only 6 o'clock. So we can go ahead and have the presentation, but it's your prerogative. With all due respect, I suggest that you let her present, but that's fine with me. One way or other, that's his prerogative. I think you can present.
I know, well, because otherwise it's just speculating that there's no substance to this, but it's all substance.
No, I understand, but let me just complete what I'm saying.
Well, you can't complain that I'm going on Facebook if you will not allow us to actually discuss what's on the agenda with the evidence so that we're not all missing each other, so that you know that there's substance to this.
I don't think it sounds like we're missing each other. I think we're getting there differently.
May I just complete? I think we had a good, let's not interject. Let me just complete what I'm saying. My suggestion is let her present. It's only 6 o'clock, but that's your prerogative. Second, if that is not acceptable to you, I like Mike Litow's suggestion to send it to grand jury for whatever she wants to present, whatever current report is, and let them look at it. I like that idea. The third, about the Financial Oversight Committee, I just want to clarify what I meant by that because I suggested that. Financial Oversight Committee, if you want to look at the past, the grand jury look at it. I like that idea. Financial Oversight Committee has to be for the future.
Yeah.
I want to see that having an oversight on the finances starting now and in the future, learning from the past, but going in the future. So I want to clarify that. So when I'm saying Financial Oversight Committee, I'm talking about future. If you want to look at past, let the grand jury look at it. And your suggestions, Erin, I like all the suggestions. What I would say is have the Finance Oversight Committee formation first, and then come up with the ideas of what can be added to that. Does that sound reasonable to you? Your suggestions are great.
Can I just clarify something so there's two things. The substance of a lot of the issues that are on my PowerPoint are about the current budget. So I think that there are still major deficiencies. This does not answer the question of the deficiencies that I raised. This does not give me any more clarity. There's still a discrepancy on the current budget. And so I think it's very wise, especially since this budget process, yes, I have in my document suggestions for things that we can change, but my goal was that if we have an advisory committee, they can say, here's what we think you guys should do to make some changes to fix what's wrong. A procedural audit, they're not doing those. They're just making the suggestions based on the documents, the current budget, what's happening, because we're going to be in this budget for 2 years.
They should look at the current budget also, current and the future.
Right. So
only thing I'm saying, not the past.
I just want to say the only reason.
Current is fine.
Just understand something. I'm just gonna say this again. Barry Tippin himself says in the June podcast from the city, if you want to understand why the current budget was so difficult this year, you have to go back to the decisions that were made in 2022. And so that's what I did. And so I looked to figure out what was the problem, what were the decisions that were made that are hurting and straining the budget now, which is, again, a lot of the findings that I found based on the things that were said to us, and do I have and these are the documents, do they match? And so when we're talking about having a committee to look at these things, it's about current practices. It's about what our budget book looks like, what should be there, what shouldn't be there, what the balance sheet should look like.
Absolutely.
What reports are we getting? When are we getting them? What is required by law for us to be provided, and at what length? So I just think instead of us all arguing over, why would we not have an advisory committee that says, go to grand jury, do an audit? This one, we don't have a lot. We have no findings here. We find something here. Why not have somebody do that?
We should have this finance review committee. We should look in the current practices and the future, which is absolutely fine with me.
Okay, that'd be great.
And but what I'm saying is, if you want a grand jury to look at those past, how decision making was done, that I'm fine with that also. So let me make a motion here. Is that okay with you, everyone?
Two motions separate.
Two motions separate? Okay, no, I'm sorry.
Can we combine the motions?
Yeah, can we just clarify the motion now?
Yeah, I don't know that I've heard a second from either, so I just recommend clarifying where they stand.
I seconded Aaron's, as long as we're moving forward and not backwards.
So there's one motion on the table?
Yeah.
Okay.
One motion, he's asking to make a motion.
Oh, so
Are you adding to her motion or a second motion?
No, I just wanted to clarify this motion because you had 5 points you wanted to bring, and then the Finance Review Committee. What I was saying was if we can just have Finance Review Committee come up with more or different suggestions if need be, that's all. It's kind of similar. I just want to clarify it.
Well, can we add this Financial Oversight Committee, that it look at the two reports and that it give us some advice about procedurally what we should do moving forward?
See, I don't want to restrict them. What I feel, what I'm suggesting is.
restriction.
What I'm suggesting is they look at the current budget and make suggestions for the future. That's what I'm asking them.
Steve, you're going to say something?
No, I'm just thinking in my head and getting ready to ask the question about what, how we should give a suggestion for what structure the finance committee would be.
That's the next step.
And I think we need to
like
bring
those-
that back would be probably something, bring back some suggestions, I think, before
That's-
it's just decided on the fly.
I am asking in my motion that the items that be brought back to council for discussion are finance director, president, all closed session, MOU negotiations, annual grant funding report by each department, reform budget workshops, policy overview meeting for newly electeds, government finance basics, and I added the financial oversight committee. Those are the topics that I would like to be brought back to council. Then we can hash out, staff can make suggestions of what those structures can look like. We can hash out what does budget reform workshop, or what does reforming the budget workshop mean to me, sort of deal. Those are all of the topics I'm asking to bring brought back.
Did you also add the orientation for new council members? Or
I said that, I
you
said
did
that.
And what was your advisory? Can you explain that again?
First, I want to say, yes, all of those are great. So I didn't understand you were just bringing them back, because so
I mean,
that's great.
some of those, I would love to make that happen. I think that we can all agree that the finance director should be in all closed session MOU negotiations.
At all times.
Yeah.
1,000%. So can that be?
Do you want me to break out what can we vote on right now?
Well,
This is informational.
I was thinking, what I was thinking is that the advisory committee could make these types of suggestions, but I think if we're all in agreement on some of them, there's no reason to bring it back to hash out. But I do think, because it means it's less things that the committee would have to go through. But I do think it should come back to kind of talk about some structure and how we would want to set up an advisory and sort of scope. I think that's totally
That's
fair
important, scope.
to talk about the scope so they actually can get some stuff done. I mean, I will say again, I'm hoping this is not like some switch. I really do think that they need to look at these things to not just satisfy me, but to satisfy the public, because people have read this. It's not just me and, Denise Maxwell. There's some more people that read it, I promise.
At least 100.
Yeah, at least 100. But the point is that it deserves to be looked at. I deserve to have a PowerPoint because the public deserves to know what in the world I'm talking about and if there's validity to it. And so it doesn't serve anybody to keep information from them. So I do think that if we can bring that back and talk about a structure, I just think that puts us in a direction to where we're looking for advice and getting a group together. So
Can I suggest that whatever suggestions you have, if we can vote on them right now, let's vote on them right now.
okay.
And the Finance Review Committee, if you want them to come back with the structure and scope and the process, then that they can bring next time, so we can vote on that next time.
Christian?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, I think just for the sake of Brown Act and transparency, the creation of the committee really ought to be something that's agendized
Yes.
that comes back.
Yeah.
Yes. But other suggestions, if you want to bring.
So I will make a motion that we approve finance director, president in negotiations, annual grant funding report back by each department, policy overview meeting for new elected council members, government finance basics course for new council members. Those are the items I believe that we can vote on right now, and then I'm making a motion to approve.
Yeah, I will make a second. I mean, I do not like so much education part in that, but.
well, League of Cities does some of this. So
They
if you go to the
definite-
class for League of Cities, you could satisfy that, if you go.
Just asking, are we allowed to vote on something, or is this information only tonight?
So ultimately, the question becomes, is this sufficiently related to the item that you had, and was there sufficient notice to the public that essentially the action would be taken? The four that we're talking about are relatively administrative matters. I don't know that we're talking about adopting a formal policy. If it did need to be a formal policy, we'd bring that back. But if you're just looking to get direction on those points, I think we're all right.
Okay.
Okay, so we don't need a vote. That's what I heard.
It would help just to
Okay.
make clear that we actually have a majority.
Yeah,
I'll second
yes.
it.
Yeah, we
Yes.
have a majority, yes. Greg, what kind of, I don't want to say the word pressure, what kind of time does that put on your staff?
Participating in a committee like that wouldn't put any more pressure on us. I mean, it'd probably likely be myself participating in that. And, frankly, I know I talk about the Oracle project a lot, but we are on the back side of that heavy lift. And so I think it's something that absolutely can be accommodated. I wouldn't worry about that at all from a council perspective.
I just would clarify, I would not have anybody from finance in the committee because they're going to be
But that's separate
evaluating.
issue. That is completely separate.
Is that what you're asking?
No.
I am,
No.
no, I am
Or do you mean in the
asking that it-
closed session meetings?
session.
Yeah, it's closed session.
Your closed session meetings would be too much for you?
No,
No, you said no.
no. What we are taking a vote on is the things that I said at the moment.
1,000%, all day, every day.
Okay, can we vote on that first, Jack? Sorry,
already
Mr.
did.
Munz.
We said yes.
Yeah, we all said yes.
Okay, perfect. Then I
Do we
would
need
like.
an official vote or just just a majority?
Okay, I would like staff to bring back topics to be discussed and potential structures for reforming budget workshops and setting up a finance committee and its scope.
Is that finance, if the
Scope, structure, and process.
one for
Yes.
finance
Committee.
passes, is that same finance committee or are they gonna be different?
Yeah, I mean, that will,
would be-
no, but,
that
but,
would be-
but,
that
it-
No,
would
that'd be totally
No,
different.
that's a
separate.
can of worms.
but it can transition into that in the future.
Well,
I
I
am
don't
just
think so.
asking for those two things to be brought back,
Right.
and that
That's fine.
discussion will happen when staff brings that back.
Gotcha. All right.
Fair enough.
Is there a majority on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unanimous.
5-0.
5-0.
5-0.
Guys, look at that.
All right, well, now I'm going to talk for a minute. When we talk about Barry's contract, it was about a raise, because he asked for a raise. As you- Yeah, well, I know, but but you talked about Barry's, when you confronted Mike, you said it was about contract. But
Yes,
Barry asked for a raise.
yes,
So it
all
was
the
about
same
the
thing.
raise,
Yeah.
So all of those.
But not the executive
But all
manager.
those raises, we started in December of '22, and all those raises that are online, as you know, and we know, and we've talked about them. And you and I were both involved in all of those and approved all of those in our time. And I think we both, I mean, you're smarter than I am, and I understood it, so I'm pretty sure that you understood it.
Didn't say I didn't.
So that, and then raises, we have, I mean, how do you appreciate staff? Other than, I mean, you can give them kind words, which I try to do, but you appreciate staff by paying them, generally speaking. And we have great people. We have about, I don't know, Mr. Webb, well over 100 million in projects that we could use, but we don't have staff. And we have a great group of people that I think deserve to be paid. And I don't think we're giving any raises anytime soon, but when it's time, I would like to. And we talk a lot about unfunded liabilities. You know, if you have a problem with unfunded liabilities, go put on a uniform. You know, put on a bulletproof vest, put on a gun belt. Every door you go to, every stop that you make could be your last. And so unfunded liability is, is just a part of business that we have, we have to go through. I mean, that's just the truth about it. I've been there. And so I just want to appreciate all of our people. And sounds like we're doing a good job of putting this budget to bed. We're moving forward. We'll address the things that here. And so thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here.
When do we get to see Tanesa's PowerPoint?
Whenever she puts it online. And, she's gone 8 months talking ad nauseum about all this stuff. We don't need to hear it again.
Okay. We had some progress, and we
Yeah.
are going to be
We're having progress.
leaders. And I'm excited about that. Thank you. Are
If
we
we're-
adjourned?
We're adjourned.
We are.
If someone wants to give an input about financial review committee, please let us know.